exactly. And in fact, one of the things that I was shown and some other people were shown that they've shared with me is, with the Out of Body Travel Foundation headquarters in the mystical spheres, is, that there's this huge library of the ancient sacred texts there. And the prophets, saints, mystics, sages, and ascetics all work there too. And, this is the royal family of God. And that this is something that we have all worked on for a long, long time, to bring that knowledge together on earth, where people can start realizing that this is a body of knowledge that really provides the key to the mysteries, where we bring it all together.
And I want to get more into that, but I just want to go a little, sometimes I go like too far with the conversation. My wife will say, you really beat that conversation to death. But so there's this web of, if we just talk about the multiverse and its energy, and because we talked about different races, we talked about galaxies, we talked about angelic hierarchies. So it's like we're not going to pray to the Arcturians. We're going to pray to God and his helpers, his angels and stuff. If the Pleiadians come by and go, hey, I want to help you out, I'd be like, sweet, thanks, man. But that wouldn't be my first go-to, right? And then there's different energies as they in the web. And so one thing I wanted to talk about was, because you had specific in our own solar system with different energies in regards to the sun, in regards to the higher realms of Venus. And I wanted to touch upon, better get the glasses out.
OMG.
Oh, yes. It's getting serious now. I wanted to touch upon what you said. I think it's right here. In regards to the chain of worlds of the 7 planets and progressing to higher worlds, planets. And you also talked about the difference in the development of the planets. And so I want to kind of touch upon our own solar system, maybe even like start with the sun, go through Mercury, if you've had any experience with that. I know you've had experience with Venus, and then Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, if applicable, or any asteroids or anything. Just, where you've had some energetic experience, because I know you've talked about higher vibrations, higher realms on these planets. Maybe not,
Some of that, yeah.
Maybe just start with the sun.
Well, the sun, I think we talked about this with the fact that it contains, many of the pathways to immortal spheres. And then I don't believe I've traveled into Mercury, but Venus has a civilization that is primarily 5th dimensional. And so this one is a spiritual world as well. Ironically, a lot of creation energy comes from Venus. Mars is a place where a lot of the angelic energies are honed, so to speak.
On Mars.
On Mars, yeah.
Yeah.
Bizarre, huh?
You're
definitely not what I expected.
Yeah. You're in Aries, and Aries is ruled by Mars.
That's true, and I am an Aries, yes. And then after Mars, you're gonna have to help me out because I'm not great with
Mars.
astronomy.
I'm gonna go straight to Saturn, I suppose, right?
Is it Saturn next? Yeah, and that's where you'll go through the initiations into Saturn's rings, and the rings have certain types of energetic properties which are necessary for the initiations into the mysteries. And then on Jupiter contains literally destiny. There's a lot to do with destiny there. That has to do, remember the difference between fates and destiny? So fates is your personal fates that have to do with families, children, things like this. But the destiny is the vocation of God in your life, the calling of God upon you in this life. So that's Jupiter. And then with Neptune and Pluto, I have not had anything of significance with those.
Uranus?
Uranus, no.
Okay.
And
Now,
I can't believe I forgot that one
yeah,
because obvious reasons.
my planet, baby. One of them. All right. So how do we work with these different energies in our solar system?
Well, you know,
How do we work with Jupiter? How do we work with rings? How do we work with maybe the higher vibrations of Venus?
I think the thing with this is you don't force it
Mhm.
with this sort of thing. In my mystery traveling here, I was taken where I needed to go. And I believe that most people, once they're following the path of the initiations and the mysteries, will be taken to the celestial bodies that contain within it the knowledge and the energies that they need to obtain. You know, there were several journeys that I also had where I had to lie upon the bodies of stars. And that has to do with the power of transformation. And so many people will probably be taken into that, which is a very important one. But, you know, as with all of out-of-body travel, mysticism, the initiations into the mysteries is also something where I don't suggest that you force it. You allow God to direct and you surrender to it. You know, so I don't feel like you have to focus on a planet or anything like that. You just want to be aware that this sort of thing can happen during the initiations and that these are some of the purposes for it.
And we talked about the map. So in a way, it's like if you've already been to some place, then and
Mm-hmm.
when you go back there, you're like, oh yeah. So in
Yeah,
a
I'm
way,
starting to put it together. You know,
yeah.
yeah, you can start putting it together, and it's very helpful when you start seeing there is, because sometimes in your initiations, you may have experiences and not really, you come back and you're like, well, I know that was important, but I don't necessarily know why. And so understanding the bigger picture that we're outlining can help you to put it together. It's like, oh, now I know what that was. And it might give you uh, the impetus to know, okay, so if I'm being placed on the body of a star, then I am being energized for transformation energy, you know. If a bunch of energy, if I'm being taken to Jupiter night after night after night, it's because there is the energizing of my destiny, God's will for my vocation in this life. So you can pinpoint some things.
And then the last thing I wanted to mention about you spoke of stars that have a soul, that
Yep.
they're living beings. So our sun is a living being. The
Mm-hmm.
planets are living beings, they're
Mm-hmm.
souls.
Yes.
Okay, so that's pretty fascinating. uh,
Yeah.
I was thinking about, let me get my glasses. So can you tell me about, this is not, so we're going to switch topics a little bit. We're still under the mechanics of existence, but so can we talk about de-energization? Why is that?
De-energiz
Why is it hard?
yeah, de-energization, that's a process where um, throughout the initiations into the mysteries, you're going to focus, there's going to be a lot of rites and rituals to de-energize the old and energize the new. That means we are going to create endpoints to things that no longer serve that which you are becoming, and we are going to put the vibration and energy behind that which you are becoming, because we don't want to create momentum anymore for the old. We're going to remove that, so we're going to de-energize it. And that's done in a myriad of ways through initiations, where first of all, you start with being shown the things that are no longer working for you so that you become consciously aware of it. And then actually initiations where they are being de-energized. And you know, that can happen in a number of ways. Sometimes it's as simple as like you're taken into places where you set things in stone. So it's like you're setting something in history. So you're either like embroidering something that is now going to be part of your past into a fabric, or chiseling it in stone so that it is now part of your past and you're going forward. There's other things that happen too to de-energize so that you can energize the new.
And so how does this fit in with the law of energy? Because that was kind of, it was like de-energization, and the law of energy was kind of what I wanted to tap into. So I get how that's energy, and then how does it work in with that overall?
Well, the law of energy is that whatever is energized is what you're going to be taking forward. And so you want to de-energize that which no longer serves you, and energize or re-energize that which is moving you forward. So anything that is of the darkness, you're not going to want to carry forward. So you're going to be de-energizing anything like that. And then you're going to re-energize those things and energize the new things that are going to take you forward. So
Okay.
the laws of energy have to do with intention, motivation, whether something serves life, serves death, all these things we talked about in the grand phases of the soul, learning about the movement of energy. Also the things we talked about regarding the book of the eights, which is the book of life, and how energy moves through the sideways eight, and how we see that the law of motion, and how we want to create balance, the balance when we reach out to extremes, and that this becomes a normal way that we can balance energy out. So we may have things that we have operating in an extreme fashion, like our vices. And so oftentimes, in order to pull those vices in, we may pull it over here on the other side to another extreme, in order to then bring it back to its proper state of balance. That's part of the laws of energy. There's a lot that you will learn about the laws of energy in the initiations. It's not just one thing, it's many, many, many things.
Okay, now you mentioned in this chapter receiving grace as quantum energy. Do you recall?
I don't recall that, but of course, I know what I'm talking about. What I was saying is that people don't realize that when we are asking for grace, when we're praying for grace and the Holy Spirit comes down upon us, that is quantum energy. It's particulate energy that comes down from heaven into us. That's what grace is. When you look at it in the mystical sphere, that's what it will look like. And so this is what you are doing. You are asking to receive energy. Grace is energy. It's upliftment that will hold you up. So this is part of the reason why quantum physicists, astrophysicists have started talking to mystics, because they have discovered that the things that mystics have said for the last 5,000 years, and this is just paraphrasing what several of them have said to me, is proving to be true in the science, which is that grace is quantum energy. You see,
Yeah.
thought is quantum energy. All these things are actually provable in the quantum fields.
Well, have you heard of heart math? I believe it's called.
I think I've heard of it, but I do not know what it is.
Well, apparently, like the energy field coming off of the heart is just massively bigger than the energy field that comes off of the brain.
Really?
Yeah, and you and also they found brain cells in the heart. Have you heard of that?
I have heard that, which is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, because you made a comment in this section about the deepest resource that we have is our heart.
Yes,
And so,
because the greatest energy that moves in the universe is God. And what is God? God is love. And everyone likes to say that, but it's an actuality. It is a real momentum. And so it is this energy that we can emanate from the heart. This is why when we really pray from the heart, in the Orthodox tradition, when they do the Jesus prayer, they call it the prayer from the heart. When you really generate this, this, this love, when you're praying for another human being, that prayer becomes so much more powerful because of that power that you are emanating from your heart. And that is because the greatest power in the universe is what God is, and that is love. And people do not understand that when you truly tap into love, unconditional love, and doing that, you are tapping into God itself, himself, herself. And when you are, it's really, really important for people to realize this. Because it seems like such a trite saying, God is love, me, you know, you know, but it is a reality that has to be understood and realized. And you do realize this in the initiations into the mysteries in powerful ways. It is so anything where you tap into that which is of its essence, pure, unadulterated, unconditional love will be the most powerful force in the universe, because that is what God is.
you know, it's interesting because when we're in the womb, our hands and our fingers are connected to our brain. Did you know that?
I
So we're
did
like,
not.
and then as we grow, you know, in the womb, then it starts to separate. But there's always a connection to our brain through our fingers. That's why mudras can be so powerful.
Right. Okay.
And so, Sanskrit, one of the original languages, is supposed to be intimately connected to our heart and our brain. Right now, if we talk about
Yeah.
the fourth chakra, our heart, our arms are an extension of our heart, our fourth chakra, right? But it's also
Yeah.
intimately connected to our brain. So even the process of writing, can be a very heart oriented, but it's also a full brain and heart connection. Like it's both. It's left and right brain when we're writing, you know. So that can be a very, for me it was like I wrote a lot. I wrote a lot. I had this you see this thing behind me?
Yes.
They're about that size, but um 4 ways, like a big giant box, and about 3.5 feet high. I had it filled with notebooks, filled, like the whole thing, hundreds of notebooks, just from writing, right? Because you can really get to, and writing can just be writing for yourself. It can be
Mm-hmm.
writing for, as things are brought to you from higher places or creatively or whatever it is. But to get into that, you get a real intimate connection with your heart,
Yeah.
I feel. in my experience. So I think for initiates, it's really um, invaluable to be just taking some time once in a while, whenever it is, do some writing. Because I'm writing about nothing, but you know what? I kind of feel this. And that, because we start to connect with ourselves in a different way by doing that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's
And I
wonderful.
agree with that, but also always having those notepads where you sleep and where you meditate so that you can write as you're coming in and out of sleep or meditations as you experience the initiations, because those are the moments where you have the most lucid memory of those experiences.
You spoke about redemption on many worlds. Were you speaking of like you having multiple lifetimes going on in different mortal realms, or were you speaking of something else? Like,
I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that I was speaking of the fact that the redemption has to be um, made possible on many worlds in a similar way. I know that there was one point, at least in some of my books, where I wrote about how I was surprised by the fact that after I realized there were aliens in heaven, you know, extraterrestrials in heaven, that there were these beautiful stained glass windows of the apostles and Christ and all these things that are familiar to us earthlings on the way into the heavenly space. And what I realized and was infused into me was that Christ was known in many worlds, that he had incarnated and set the redemption in many worlds.
mhm.
And ironically, this is something that is talked about in the Urantia book. I hadn't realized it at the time, but since then I have, where uh, he he incarnated and had to, because Christ was above all the other things that we know him to be. He was a model. So he brings in that potentiality into whatever world that he incarnates into, to make it possible for the other souls that are incarnate within it to be able to reach that height. And so he incarnates into it to bring that potential into the realm. And so what I had been shown was that he had set that possibility of redemption onto many worlds. Now, it's possible that, on hindsight, maybe there's more than one way that we travel into this heavenly sphere. I'm sure that's the case. That a person from another planet would go through a row of their own sacred symbols from their world. But that's what I was referring to, that I realized that Christ, um, as Messiah, had done this in many worlds.
And then how does restoration fit in with this? Is this like after redemption and we're like, then it's restoration? I know there's many levels of redemption, right? We're redeemed for this, but then we need to, and then to become restored again.
Well, restoration occurs because we then create another birth point. So because what happens after the redemption, which is modeled by this crucifixion, which is a death, we then have to create a new birth, which is ironically the entry of the divine feminine energy, which is creation. So then we are taking all that has had to die in us in order to create this fertile ground. And now we're going to create a new birth point.
Let's look at the two teachers, divine and natural, and the false teacher.
Yes. And so the divine teacher is You know, the Spirit of God that is trying to teach us from within. The natural teacher is also called the false teacher, which is the spirit of our natural inclinations. And you know, these are the opposing forces that are trying to teach the soul from within to go in contrary directions. And so this is a lot of where discernment has to come in. This is where the discernment of the soul becomes so necessary, because in order for us to actually begin to discern the fruits of the Spirit in our own spiritual journey, we have to be able to delineate between the two, whether we're following what is just natural worldly wisdom or the Spirit of God. You know, ironically, John Bunyan spoke of the natural teacher kind of as a character in the Pilgrim's Progress called Worldly Wise Man. I think that kind of says it all, you know, and so, you know, so there is a way to be wise in the world, and there is a completely contrary way, which leads us to the wisdom of the soul. One of the things from this text, which is written by a Benedictine, that I want to share because it's good. It's by Dom B. Weld Blundell, a monk of the Order of Saint Benedict from 1657. So he gives a list of criteria, and he says that divine inspirations ever tend to produce simplicity in our thoughts, words, and deeds, and to lead us to a more perfect exercise of obedience, humility, resignation, purity of intention, purity of prayer. And whatever is contrary to these is to be rejected as a suggestion of the devil. Now, what's interesting also, you can compare this to the Examen by St. Ignatius of Loyola, which will be familiar to most Catholics, which is a very familiar way to learn the discernment of spirits. But in the Examen of St. Ignatius, one of the ways that you undergo the discernment of spirits is by looking at whether or not something creates peace and tranquility, or whether or not it creates upset or chaos in the soul. And those things that are creating this disturbance, you can immediately discern as not being completely of a pure spirit. But Weld Blundell, the monk of the Order of St. Benedict, has a list of 15 things. And he says, instances where the divine impulse or invitation usually suggests omission are the following, among others. This is really helpful because it gives us just a small framework from which to begin with in beginning our discernment. So, 1, to avoid unnecessary correspondence and conversation. In Buddhism, they would call that frivolous speech. You know. Mm-hmm. 2, to be wary and sparing in the use of the tongue. Again, frivolous speech. 3, not to avoid anxiously occasions of mortification or affliction, meaning not to be afraid of suffering or difficulty, not to be afraid of it, to be willing to move through it. Now, how we speak of always moving through, not trying to go around, because going around just stops the journey and we end up not getting anything done. So we don't want to be anxious about moving through. We will go through occasions of mortification and affliction. Suffering is a natural part of the human experience. Don't be anxious about it. It's part of the path. 4, to avoid encumbering ourselves with business which does not concern us. And so we have to learn the process of not involving ourselves in wasteful, again, frivolous speech or frivolous activity, frivolous thought about things which are none of our business. 5, to fly from honors, offices, or care over others. So we fly from the responsibilities of things which are filled with, honors and, earthly titles, things that make us feel good, that can actually become a fetter, which holds us to the ground. Or when he refers to caring over others, he's referring to caring needlessly over the affairs of others. Again, getting overly involved in things which can become an encumbrance to spiritual progress. 6, not to crave the possession of unnecessary things. 7, not to question or expostulate, except it be a duty. And what he's talking about here is simplicity in, this is discernment again, where going back to what we discussed earlier about the beginner's mind has millions of questions about many, many things. And it thinks that having millions of questions is a superior place, when in fact, the closer you move towards God, you become much more obedient to what you begin to understand as the will of God as it flows out towards you. And so even when there are things that you may not fully comprehend or understand, you are achieving the wisdom and the respect that you are able to acknowledge that even if you do not fully understand something, a truth, that if you have been given this, either through the Spirit of God, through one of your lawfully placed superiors, that you can trust their transmission of that, and that you understand that you now must go through the process of understanding it. Not that you must say, well, no, that doesn't make, see, that's the beginner's approach. No, that doesn't make any sense, blah, 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 blah. It's okay. All right, I do not yet understand that, but now I will go through the process of taking that in energetically. Doesn't mean you don't question. Doesn't mean you become an automaton, a stupid person, but it means that you become respectful and able to receive influx from higher sources. You are able to be taught. Do you see the difference?
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between being stupid and refusing to question what you receive, because obviously everything you receive in the mystical states, you discern and you question. That's a whole nother subject we've talked about before and we'll talk about again. But there's another aspect of it, which is respect and being capable of being taught, which requires the humility to be able to receive. Are you able to be taught, which means that you can respectfully receive knowledge that you don't yet know. And so then you have to be willing to then say, I do not yet know this, I do not understand it, but I will now begin the prayerful and studious process that it will require of me to reach that point that this master or that God is at, that is asking me to now take this understanding to that higher level where I eventually will understand it. Rather than wasting a lot of breath on, no, that can't be true, blah, 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 blah. you're like, okay, well, like for instance, you know, you get to a certain point where you're like, okay, if you're Catholic, you're like, okay, well, if Pope John Paul II proclaimed this to be true, I've learned over, the last several decades that most of the things that I didn't understand previously that he had proclaimed made sense eventually. So this will likely make sense to me if I do the proper research, study, prayer, and basically do all the work. And so I'm going to take it for granted that he is probably right, and I'm going to proceed accordingly. And then you will find that you find your answers that lead you to what you need to know. If you are a Tibetan Buddhist, you may give that same credence to the Dalai Lama or whoever your teacher might be. It's whoever is in the line of obedience that you are following.